من هؤلاء السلف؟ هم الصحابة والتابعون لهم بإحسان وأئمة المسلمين كالإمام أحمد بن حنبل ومالك والشافعي وأبي حنيفة وسفيان الثوري والأوزاعي وغيرهم من أئمة المسلمين.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. Continuing then with this very brief and summarized small book of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymīn رحمه ta'ala, or his explanation regarding the fiqh of Ramadan. We are on this section here now where he says وَتَبَيَّنَ before that وَقَوْلُهُ وقوله قادر أي على الصيام, or it begins here ويلزم الصوم لكل مسلم مكلف قادر, that fasting is mandatory, obligatory on every Muslim mukallaf, the one who has reached the age of puberty and the rulings are now obligatory on him, the responsibility is on him, qadir, and the one who is capable. So fasting is an obligation upon every Muslim who has the responsibility on him, meaning he's at the age of puberty now and older, and qadir, that he is able to fast. إذا رأيت كلمة مكلف في كلام الفقهاء فالمراد بها, Shaykh Al-Uthaymīn says, when you see this word, the mukallaf, you see it in the context of fiqh, the mukallaf. The meaning of that, according to the fuqaha, when they mention it, is al-baligh al-aqil, the one who has reached the age of puberty, the one who has his intellect, as opposed to the one who is majnoon, for example, who doesn't have his mental faculties, and as opposed to the one who hasn't reached the age of puberty. So the mukallaf is the one who has reached the age of puberty and has his intellect, his mental faculties intact. So if a person has not reached the age of puberty yet, is fasting an obligation upon that person such that he would be a sinner if he didn't fast? No. Even though, of course, we know from the guidance of the Salaf that the youngsters should fast if they are able to get into that practice. And this would also mean that a person who does not have their mental faculties, then that person also, the obligation of fasting is not upon him. So that is the mukallaf, al-baligh al-aqil, the one who is of the age of puberty and the one who has his mental faculties intact. وَقَوْلُهُ qadir. So it has to be a Muslim as opposed to a kafir. A kafir, even if he fasts, it will not be accepted. A kafir even if he fasts, it will not be accepted from him. Worship is only acceptable upon Tawheed, upon a person having entered into Islam. So it has to be a Muslim, it has to be the Mukallaf, and it has to be the one who is Qadir. Because you could have someone now who is a Muslim, he is Mukallaf, he's of the age of puberty, he has his mental faculties, but he may not be the third thing needed, Qadir. He may not be capable of fasting. قادر أي على الصيام احترازا من العاجز فليس عليه صوم. So the one who is incapable, not able to fast, then there is no fasting upon him. And we're going to look at the two types of people who are considered as incapable, or the two situations where incapability comes into it. تبين بالتتبع والاستقراء أن العجز ينقسم إلى قسمين. So follow what we're doing. We're talking about the definition of who fasting is an obligation upon. It is an obligation upon a Muslim who is mukallaf, of the age of puberty, with his mental faculties, and is able. Now we're looking at this third issue of being able. There are two types of situations where a person is not able. One of those is قسم طارئ وقسم دائم. One situation where somebody may not be able to fast is when they are incapable temporarily. It is a temporary state of being unable. The other one is a constant state of being unable. Two types of inability to fast. Either a temporary inability to fast or a permanent inability to fast. As for the temporary inability to fast, which of course could just be someone who is not well and sick for a few days, so they cannot fast for those few days, and then after Ramadan, after Eid, they are better again and they can just make them up. They were incapable, they were unable temporarily for a few days. That's temporary inability, and that is mentioned in the Quran. The temporary inability, the قسم طارئ, هو المذكور في قوله تعالى ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر. In Al-Baqarah 185, that whomsoever is ill or traveling, then they make up those number of days from other days, meaning after Eid. So when you are sick, if you're sick enough not to be able to fast, then those days are a temporary inability to fast. When you're traveling, if you're traveling for a few days, we briefly talked about this last week. If you're traveling for a few days, then you're allowed to miss the fasting. And some people may actually be incapable of fasting when they're traveling anyway. So that would be a type of temporary inability, because you're unable to fast during the days that you are traveling. When you come back from your traveling, that temporary inability has gone. You're not traveling anymore, so you can now fast. So traveling would only be considered as a temporary inability. Being sick for a few days would only be a temporary inability. And that's what Allah says here, that whomsoever وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Whoever is sick or traveling, then make up a number of days, make up those days afterwards, because being sick or being traveling is only a temporary inability in those days. The second type, though, is a permanent inability. Somebody who just cannot ever fast. There could be different reasons for that, but somebody who just cannot fast. Maybe they have some type of permanent illness. They require permanent procedures or permanent medication, some permanent issue with them. They never get better. So now they are permanently incapable of fasting, perhaps. Or maybe somebody very old in age, and can't fast anymore. So their inability to not fast is permanent, because after Eid, are they going to be younger than they were in Ramadan or older? Older. So if they couldn't fast in Ramadan because of their old age, they're going to be even more incapable as time goes by. Permanent inability now. So there could be situations where somebody has a permanent inability, and that's in the Quran as well. في قوله تعالى وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين. For those who are incapable, وعلى الذين يطيقونه. The meaning in this ayah is الذين لا يطيقونه. The ones who are not capable, the incapable, can't fast. فدية طعام مسكين. Then they simply give the fidya of feeding a poor person every day. We'll come to those rulings in a minute. كالعاجز عاجزا لا يرجى زواله عليه الإطعام عن كل يوم مسكينا. So now this is talking about an example of somebody who is in a state of inability and there is no hope for them to ever get out of that state. For example, somebody very old, there is no hope for them to get out of that state. They're only getting older and weaker. No hope for them to get healthier again and be able to fast. And also somebody with a permanent illness, some kind of chronic illness, no hope for them to get better. They can never fast again. Their doctors have told them medication, etc. Their body cannot fast. So it is not hoped. There is no real hope for them to get out of that situation. They are in a permanent inability. Those kinds of people who are in a permanent inability, the ruling for them is that there is no fasting upon them in that case. They are unable. But then the ruling is, obviously they don't have to make up the days because they are in a permanent inability. Instead, they have to feed a poor person for every day. They have to feed a poor person for every day. We'll come to the details of that in a moment. But as for the ones who are in a temporary inability, then they are allowed to miss those fasts during the days of their temporary inability, sick for a few days or traveling for a few days. And then after that, the ruling is they have to make it up. They have to make up those days. They have to make up those days. So those are the two types of situations where a person is excused from fasting, either because of a temporary inability or a permanent inability. In the category of the temporary inability, you have people who are sick temporarily for a few days. You have people who are traveling. That's only a temporary inability for the days when you're traveling. Afterwards, make it up. On the side of permanent inability, you have people with permanent illnesses who cannot fast, and you have people who are old in age, cannot fast. So those two types of people, permanent illness, old age, they would just feed a poor person for every day. The one who is only sick for a while or traveling for a while, temporary. Their ruling is they have to make up the days afterwards. The question now is then, if you've understood those two categories, permanent and temporary, we've talked about the traveler who can miss, we've talked about the sick person temporarily or permanently, and we've talked about the elderly person. 4 categories of people so far. Which other categories of people are allowed to miss fasting?
A woman on her period.
A woman on her period. And also, woman who is pregnant, possibly, yes, with all the details that come into that. And a woman who is on her postnatal bleeding, the postpartum. That will come to later. That in that case, if you don't have your senses, because that is about the intellect. The intellect has gone then. If you're unconscious, obviously you cannot fast. We'll come to that later. But here, the woman who is pregnant or not pregnant, well, okay, pregnant as well. Let's do that one too. And the woman who is on her period and the postpartum bleeding. The one who is on her period, the ruling for that is simple. If she's on her period, then that is considered permanent or temporary inability. Temporary inability, it only lasts for a few days. The period only lasts for a few days, it's temporary. And when it finishes, she then has to make it up. So she's into the category of the temporary inability. Postpartum bleeding after childbirth, temporary, it only lasts for a couple of weeks, a few weeks, and then after that she can make it up. She's going to go into the temporary inability. The pregnant woman, why you gone quiet? Why ikhtilaf now all of a sudden? Now ikhtilaf, mashallah. Pregnant woman is always pregnant. She gets pregnant. She's pregnant until she dies.
Then she feeds. She gets pregnant. And she feeds.
So, according to the fiqh, a pregnant woman, pregnancy, is it permanent or temporary?
Temporarily.
Inshallah, when you grow up, you find out it's temporary. It's temporary. Pregnancy is temporary. It is not permanent. No doubt, nobody can argue over that. It is temporary. No such thing as permanent pregnancy. It is temporary. So according to this principle here so far, of the permanent inability and temporary inability, the pregnant woman, technically upon this ruling, should go into which category? The temporary one, because when she finishes her pregnancy, then she can make up the days. And that's why to keep it very simple, that is why some of the scholars, they have the opinion, in fact not just some of them, many of the scholars these days now, a lot of the scholars are on the opinion that a woman who is pregnant, if she misses fasting, because remember, when a woman is pregnant, that is not an automatic reason to miss fasting. It is not an automatic reason. Like traveling is an automatic reason. You're allowed to miss when you're traveling, even if you're capable. But pregnancy is not an automatic reason. A woman can't say, I'm pregnant, that's it, I'm going to miss fasting. Scholars give more details than that. It depends on whether the fasting is actually even going to impact on her or not. Whether it's going to impact on her or her child. Because the fuqaha have different rulings. If she doesn't fast because she fears the impact, Adhan, go ahead. She fears the impact on her child, it's a different ruling. If she fears the impact on herself, it's a different ruling. So pregnancy is not automatic. But let's go past that and say she missed the days. So now then, let's assume a pregnant woman, going past all the initial issues, has missed the days or some days of Ramadan. So according to the two categories we've established that exist, she would fit into the temporary inability. And that is impossible to argue against in terms of the facts. Pregnancy is not permanent. It is not permanent. It is temporary. Even if she gets pregnant again afterwards and pregnant again afterwards. But she does not carry on becoming pregnant if she lives till 80 years old. At 50 or 55 or something, eventually she will not get pregnant anymore. So even upon that basis, eventually she will stop becoming pregnant. If women live till 70 years old, they do not get pregnant. Very rare to get pregnant at 60 or 65 or 70 or 75. So pregnancy is temporary, whichever way you look at it. It's not something permanent like a disease that somebody has, or old age where it's impossible to now become younger. So pregnancy from all those angles would technically fit into the temporary inability. And that's why many of the scholars, they have the opinion that a woman who is pregnant and misses, then upon her is to simply make up those days afterwards. They say it is more befitting to put the pregnant woman into the temporary inability category than it is to put her into the permanent inability category. Because her situation is not permanent like the one who is old in age or the one who has a permanent illness that doesn't go away. Pregnancy comes and goes. Very rare that a woman would even be in that situation where she is pregnant, feeding. Very rare that a woman has back to back every 2 years feeding, pregnant, that she carries on like this for 20 years. Very rare. Show me how many women have done that. So, in reality, that doesn't really happen that often either, that it's going to be back to back for 20 years, for 30 years. Very rare. So from all of those angles, it would be considered temporary. There are, of course, many evidences, but we're just talking about these boxes, these categories. So upon that basis, many scholars, they say upon her is to make up the days. There are scholars, though, who say no, she does not have to make up the days, that she is actually to be put alongside the permanent inability category. And upon that basis, she would only have to feed a poor person for every day that she missed. And there are some narrations about that, Ibn Abbas and others highlighting that too. Shaykh Ibn says here, in the text, it mentions وَإِنْ أَفْطَرَتْ حَامِلٌ أَوْ مُرْضِعٌ خَوْفًا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمَا قَضَتَاهُ فقط وعلى ولديهما قضتاه وأطعمتا عن كل يوم مسكينا. This is some of the detail that some of the fuqaha mention. They say if a pregnant or breastfeeding mother, both of them, either a pregnant woman or a woman who is in the breastfeeding period, if they do not fast because they fear upon themselves, if they do not fast because they fear upon themselves, upon their own health, they fear for their own health, not the baby. If the woman isn't missing the fasting because of the baby, but because of her own health, if she fears for her own health, then in that case, all she has to do, according to some of the fuqaha, is make up those days and that's it. Make up those days afterwards. But if a pregnant woman or a breastfeeding woman misses the fasts because she fears for the health of her baby, then in that case she has to make up the days again afterwards and feed a poor person for each day. That is the ruling of some of the fuqaha. So Shaykh Ibn says, أفاد المؤلف أنه يجوز للحامل والمرضع أن تفطرا وإن لم تكونا مريضتين، وذلك لأن الحامل يشق عليها الصوم من أجل الحمل، ولأن صيامها يمكن أن يؤثر على نمو الطفل. So Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen says it is permissible for the pregnant woman or the breastfeeding woman to miss the fasting, even if they are not actually sick or anything, but to miss it because of the pregnancy, because that is then a burden and it is difficult to fast with the pregnancy, and fasting may affect the growth of that baby, whether in pregnancy or breastfeeding, because then of course the breastfeeding is impacted if a woman is fasting, so it may affect the growth of that child. وكذلك في المرضع إذا صامت يقل لبنها فيتضرر بذلك الطفل. So the breastfeeding woman also, if she fasts, her milk will be reduced, and so the baby may be harmed by that. ولهذا كان من رحمة الله أن رخص لهما في الفطر فيجب عليهما القضاء. So Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen says it is from the mercy of Allah that they are also allowed to then miss the fasting, and it is obligatory upon them to make up those days. That is the opinion as Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen mentions here. This is the opinion many of the scholars these days they take, as Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen, as Shaykh Ibn Baz, many of the scholars, that the pregnant or breastfeeding woman, if they miss the fasting, they have to make up those days. That's the minimum ruling. Then some of them have the ruling, if it's for the baby, you got to feed as well a poor person for every day. But that is the ruling of many of the scholars. There is an alternative opinion where some of the scholars, they say, no, she goes into the permanent inability category, a pregnant woman and a breastfeeding woman, and so she doesn't have to make up those days afterwards. She can just feed a poor person. And they say, they give the example that imagine a woman is pregnant, so she misses this Ramadan. Then after that, for 2 years, she is feeding the child, wet nursing the child. So that's another 2 Ramadans. Then after that, she becomes pregnant again maybe, and then feeds again, so that's maybe another 3 years gone, possibly 6 years now. And if that happens 3 or 4 times, maybe 12 years in a row, possibly, can happen. So then the scholars, they said, the Sharia has not been revealed to overburden a person in this way. For that type of woman in that situation now, are you going to say to her after 12 years, now start making up 12 Ramadans? The scholars, they said, the Sharia has not come to burden a person in this way. And so, that's one of their kind of logical explanations. That's not an evidence, but it's a logical explanation that the Sharia has not come to burden people in this level. Maybe even more, maybe 15 years, could be 18 years, rare, but it's possible. You may have some women in that kind of situation where they have years and years to make up because of pregnancies and breastfeeding. So the scholars, they said the Sharia does not burden a woman in that way. So surely she goes into the permanent category and she only feeds a poor person for every day. And there are narrations of some of the Salaf backing up that opinion too. From the two of them, of course, if a woman, especially if a woman isn't in that extreme situation, it's not 9, 10, 12 Ramadans, it's perhaps 1, perhaps 2, and then there's a break, and then maybe afterwards she gets pregnant, another 1 or 2. In those kinds of situations, no doubt, the safer opinion is obviously to make up those fasts afterwards rather than just feeding the person. To make up the fasting of those days that were missed is the safer opinion. But those opinions, they exist. We won't go into detail on that now. But a few years ago during COVID, we did a small lecture once. It was the online ones, about 30 minutes long. There's a video recording 30 minutes long with all of the opinions and details. The opinion of Al-Imam Malik, Al-Imam Shafi'i, Al-Imam Ahmed, Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, all of their madhahib and their fiqh regarding the pregnant woman, the breastfeeding woman, this evidence, that evidence. How do they reply to the ones who say it's permanent? How do they reply to the Ibn Abbas narration? How do they reply to these ones? More of a detailed discussion just on that topic. It was done. It's available. It's online in places. So then, if you have to feed, if the woman has to feed, and these are some of the differences, just briefly. If she fears for herself, like we said, and she misses, then in that case she only has to make up the days. But if she fears upon her child, then she makes up the day and feeds a poor person. And if she misses, what's the third possibility? She misses the fasting because she fears both on the child and herself. In that case, if she misses both of them, in this booklet, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymīn says, al-Mu'allif sakata an hadhihi al-hala, that he hasn't mentioned the details of what she does in this particular situation. وأرجح الأقوال, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymīn says, according to him, the strongest opinion is أنه يلزمهما القضاء فقط دون الإطعام لأن غاية ما يكون أنهما كالمريض والمسافر. So this is again a good reasoning. He says, according to what he views, a pregnant or breastfeeding woman, if she misses the fasting, regardless of whether it is for fear on herself or fear of her child, to her child, regardless, whichever situation, that all she has to do is make up the days. Doesn't have to feed at all. He says because, going back to our categories, upon this opinion we're putting her into the category of the temporary ones. The temporary ones, the one who gets sick for a while or the one who travels, all they have to do is make them up. Where has this extra feeding come in? He says, why are we putting this extra feeding on her? Even if she's missing them for her child, even if she's missing them for herself. Whatever the reason, she is in the temporary category, and that category is just to make up the days. Why the extra feeding as well? So he says, according to him, all she has to do is make up those days. There is no need for any additional feeding. And this is upon the opinion that the days have to be made up. Then moving through the text, he goes through the issue of the intention, which we already spoke about before. The hadith, "Man lam yubayyit al-Ṣiyām qabla al-Fajr fala Ṣiyām lah." Whoever does not make their intention the night before Fajr comes in, then your fast won't count. Meaning for Ramadan, obligatory fasts, you have to make the intention before طلوع الفجر, before the Fajr time enters. You have to make your intention before that. Meaning if a person made their intention after that, that day wouldn't count. You remember we talked about that if the moon wasn't sighted or nobody found out, then later that day they found out the moon was sighted last night. So then they start fasting, but still they have to make up that day in the end afterwards because they didn't do the full day with the intention from before Fajr. But if it is supererogatory, nafal fasting, then you can start in the middle of the day. If it's a nafal fast, nafal, not Ramadan, not fard, just an optional fast, one day you just decide to fast sometime in the year, then you can begin in the middle of the day. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ of Aisha radiallahu anha, when she mentioned دخل علينا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات يوم فقال هل عندكم شيء قلنا لا قال فإني إذن صائم. She said one day the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came home. This was outside of Ramadan, just a normal day. He came home and he said, have we got any food in the house? Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, we told him we have nothing to eat in the house. This is how it was. No food at all. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Inni idhan sa'imun. In that case, I'm just going to fast for the day, because he hadn't eaten or drunk anything since before Fajr that day anyway. No food, nothing. Hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk since before Fajr. And now he came home, maybe Dhuhr time or something, and said to Aisha, is there anything to eat? She said, nothing. He said, in that case, I'm just going to make the intention and carry on till Maghrib, and then we'll find something. So he fasted the rest of the day, made the intention, and that counts. You'll get the reward for a nafal fast for your intention upon that. But the obligatory ones, no. The obligatory ones, you have to make the intention before the Fajr time enters. Do you have to make the intention every single night of Ramadan in that case? That's a difference of opinion. Some scholars, they say, if you make the intention at the beginning of Ramadan, on the first night of Ramadan, what intention are you making? To fast the whole of Ramadan? Nobody thinks to themselves, the first night of Ramadan, I'm going to fast tomorrow, the first day, then I'll think about second day and third day and the rest of Ramadan afterwards. Nobody thinks that. Everybody, as soon as the announcement is made and the messages, mashallah, they go everywhere. That night, everybody is now making their intention, thinking about the next 30 days or 29 days. From the first night, you are making your intention for the whole of Ramadan. So some scholars, they say that's it. That's your intention done for the whole of Ramadan. From the first night, it's in your mind now, the whole of Ramadan. But there are some scholars based upon the narration, مَنْ لَمْ يُبَيِّتِ الصِّيَامَ قَبْلَ الْفَجْرِ فَلَا صِيَامَ لَهُ. Whoever doesn't make his intention before the Fajr, no fast for you. Based upon that, some scholars do say every night you do need to have that intention. But even then, it doesn't mean that every day you have to remember to think to yourself, I'm fasting tomorrow for the sake of Allah. Every night when you put your alarm on, you're putting your alarm on to get up for what reason? For suhoor, to fast. So by putting your alarm on, it means your intention is there. You have your intention there by your actions, by putting the alarm on, by getting that ready. all of that, you have your intention to fast the next day. So the intention is there. Your intention to fast is there. So that is regarding the intention. Then Shaykh Al-Uthaymīn goes on to ما يفسد الصوم ويوجب الكفارة. المفسد للصوم يسمى عند العلماء المفطرات أو المفطرات. Now going on to the topic of what breaks your fast. What breaks your fast? What are the things that would break your fast in Ramadan? And what do you have to do if you break your fast with one of those things? The first thing obviously is man akala. Whoever eats. If you eat intentionally, because we know if somebody completely forgot and ate, then that breaks or doesn't break your fast? Doesn't break your fast. Man nasiya fa'akala aw shariba. Whoever forgets and eats and drinks, فَلْيُتِمَّ صَوْمَهُ. Then he has to finish his fasting, carry on fasting the rest of the day. Because you completely accidentally ate or drank, completely forgot. And that it says in the hadith, إِنَّمَا أَطْعَمَهُ اللَّهُ وَسَقَاهُ. Allah has given you that sustenance. You completely forgot but the rule is, as soon as you remember, you have to stop. So if you completely forgot and you're drinking, and you get to here, the water is out in your mouth, and there you remember. When it's there, what do you have to do? Get it back into the bottle. Don't swallow it now. If you are here, then you remember. Don't swallow that one now. You swallow that one now. You have swallowed it after you remembered. Your fast is broken. As soon as you remember, you must stop. Even if it's food, physical food, you're eating something and you take a bite and then you remember. That bite which is in your mouth, you have to take it out. You can't swallow that one now and then, okay, I remembered now. You've swallowed that one after remembering, your fast is gone. So you must immediately stop when you remember. So the one who eats on purpose though, al-akl idkhalu shay'in ila al-ma'ida an tariq al-fam wa yashmal ma. Okay, so here he says, eating is inserting something into the stomach via the mouth. You could say though that it doesn't necessarily have to be via the mouth. It could be injections, it could be all these other tubes and things and different ways. The point is inserting food into the body, inserting nutrition into the body. ويشمل ما ينفع وما يضر وما لا ينفع فما ينفع كالخبز واللحم وما لا ينفع كالحشيش والخمر وما لا يضر ولا ينفع كأن يبتلع خرزة سبحة أو نحوها. He says this includes anything that you insert into your stomach, whether it is actual food that is nutritious and benefits you, like bread or meat, or whether it is something which does not benefit you, it is not permissible, like alcohol or things like that, or things that don't even give you nutrition, like some object, you swallow it, you've taken it down into your stomach, all of that considered eating. وقال بعض أهل العلم إنما لا يغذي لا فطر بأكله. But some scholars ruled out the last category. The last category where you swallow something that isn't even actually food. You swallow something like some bean or you have the necklace, those beads, you swallow a bead or something which isn't even food. Some scholars, they say that is still considered eating. It's gone down into your stomach. Other scholars, they say no, that wouldn't be classified as eating because obviously there is no nutrition to that. That's not going to be digested into your body. So there is a difference on that. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymīn says, anything. الصحيح أنه عام وأنه مفطر لإطلاق آية كلوا واشربوا. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymīn says anything that you swallow down into your stomach, then that would count as eating. Because the ayah is general. Eat and drink. كلوا واشربوا حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود. Until that true dawn comes. After that, no eating or drinking, whatever you eat or drink. So some of the fuqaha, they say anything, even if it's not food that you swallow, it would be counted as eating. أو شرب أو استعطى. Or you drink something, or you take something in via the nose. If you take some liquid in or something, drops through the nose and it goes down, then that is also considered as eating and drinking. For example, when you are fasting, when you make wudu, you are not supposed to the gargling. You're not supposed to do the gargling when you make wudu. It says in the narration, وَبَالِغْ فِي الْإِسْتِنْشَاقِ ما لم أو إلا أن تكون صائما. بالغ في الاستنشاق ما لم تكن صائما. Do the gargling when you put the water in and you gargle it around there. But when you're fasting, you're not supposed to do that. When you're fasting, take it in at a lower level, wash around and take it out. So that is to prevent anything going down. So anybody who takes it through the nose, then that would also be counted as eating or drinking. We'll just finish on this. أو احتقن. Take some type of injection. الاحتقان وهو إدخال الأدوية عن طريق الدبر وهو معروف ولا يزال يعمل. He mentions this in particular. One of the methods is where you are given certain medications via the anal canal, via the anal route. They insert pills or whatever it is via that method. So that again would be impermissible, and that would also break your fast in that way. However, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Uthaymīn says لا فطر في الحقنة لأنه لا يطلق عليه اسم الأكل والشرب. Shaykh al-Islam says taking medicine from that route, from the anal route, where they insert medicine in from there, he says that doesn't break your fast because that is not called eating or drinking. Clearly that is not called eating or drinking, and that would not be within the category of eating and drinking. So he says no, that wouldn't be the case. لا لغة ولا عرفا. Neither linguistically can you say that is eating or drinking, neither in the norms of the people do any people consider that to be eating or drinking. وليس هناك دليل في الكتاب والسنة أن مناط الحكم وصول الشيء إلى الجوف والراجح قول شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية. So there's nothing in the evidences that indicates that it's all about getting something to the stomach. If it was just about getting something into the stomach, into the nutrition, then yes, even through the anal canal, that would be counted. But there isn't evidence for that. The evidence says actually eating and drinking, and that wouldn't constitute eating and drinking. So Shaykh Ibn Uthaymīn is on the same opinion as Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, that doesn't break your fast.